Progress is a contemptuous thing at times, a beast raised to grow fat by feeding off of what has come before it. And yet stagnation and complacency are their own manner of beasts, who would see rust and decay before anything nurturing. The two are locked in eternal struggle by those who cannot seem to shake off the past, and yet are flung careworn into the future, arms outstretched not to embrace it, but in desperate attempt to find something of which to grab hold. Mr. Hawthorne considered himself a student of the old ways of thinking. It was not simply a matter of age. His 80th birthday had come and gone, leaving him feeling no more wiser than when he was a boy of 12. Nor was it what one might charitably call his upbringing, though such a term seemed hardly fitting for a baby-boomer-era orphan. He suspected that his grasp on the ways of life to which he was accustomed to be a matter of simple cowardice. The word stuck in the back of his mind, unable to sink into his subconscious. It had been one of a few things that he had learned from his father before the war. Yes, his brave hero father, who died tragically in the war, made certain his boy knew what cowardice was, and moreover what the penalty for cowardice would be. How much bravery had his father shown as the German Luftwaffe tore his plane to pieces? Mr. Hawthorne certainly hoped it was more than he had displayed with his son. He could move forward and accept that times were changing, but that required accepting that his time was over. Mr. Hawthorne did not care for that line of reasoning. Oh, certainly, his time was nearly over. With no progeny, he was leaving the world to nobody in particular. Those who remained were free to whatever was left of it. But so long as he still drew breath, he would live as he saw fit. But the world is not amenable to what it considers relics of a bygone era. Mr. Hawthorne's one cling to the world was in his library, a dusty brick cathedral of knowledge which the city had deemed an eyesore. Urban renewal, that was the ticket. Burn away the old and baptize the failing downtown America within the waters of progress. Mr. Hawthorne was treated to a visit with a representative from the mayor's office, who spoke with all the comforting tones of a rusty chainsaw, a thick, gravelly voice with about 20 years of Southern buried beneath a hearty attempt at the sugary Midwestern accent native to news anchors and politicians. "Bill, it's not like we're not going to have a library," said the jackhammer in a suit. "We're moving you all to a nice new building on the outskirts, near the school. All the nice kids will be able to come in and grab some books on their way home. Why, you might help a new generation develop a love for reading, and now wouldn't that be something?" "That nice new building on the outskirts won't have the history this building has. It's a part of this town," Mr. Hawthorne replied. "But I've said my piece at City Hall and wasn't listened to then, so I'm sure this is going to have the same result." It did. Not that Mr. Hawthorne was not prepared. He had spent the past week boxing up his books with the help of a few staff that he'd hired. The process was as tedious as it was heartbreaking. Watching books come off the shelves where they had been for decades, some never having moved at all since they were first placed there, felt uncomfortably like he was evicting his tenants. "It's not me," he tried to rationalize. "Nor is it that man. It's just the times." Once more, Mr. Hawthorne felt the harsh sting of his age. It was then that his hands ran across an unfamiliar collection of dusty leather. The book had a simple brown cover that had no library organization sticker on its spine, nor a punch card in its sleeve, and with closer examination, Mr. Hawthorne found that this was just the first of many mysteries. The book had no title, no copyright date, not even a publisher's mark. Somebody probably placed this here as a prank, or perhaps something more sinister. He'd seen teenagers always trying to leave pornographic material or the Satanic Bible in an attempt at humor, rather oblivious to the fact that, as a public library, they already had the latter. Mr. Hawthorne prepared himself for the worst, and opened up the book to the first page. "This book will not tell you a story that you want to read. This book will tell you a story that you need to read." The message was rather blunt and unimaginative. It seemed to be an attempt at a hook to lure the reader in further, though, were it not for the other odd traits, Mr. Hawthorne would likely have put the book down and moved on to another. He resigned himself to attempt to solve the oddity, and moved on to the next page. "Once upon a time, there was a great and powerful wizard." It was some sort of fairy tale. The mystery was solved. And yet, it was an oddly dark manner to present a fairy tale. an unremarkable book with a cryptic message to start off. Usually, children's books were bright and colorful. Perhaps then this was a work for adults, masquerading as a simple fairy tale. And so, Mr. Hawthorne continued. Once upon a time, there was a great and powerful wizard. He was beloved by all the kingdom for his gift at crafting healing spells and performing wonderful feats of magic. One day, the king came to him and said that his magic was troubling a neighboring kingdom. The king said that they were so frightened that such a powerful wizard lived close to them. "You must hide away your power," the king said, "or else it will mean war." "But what am I to do?" the wizard asked. "There are many people sick who require my potions. There are knights who have need of my blessings. Am I to stop helping them?" The writing was rather simplistic, reaffirming Mr. Hawthorne's assumption that this was indeed a fairy tale for children. It certainly read like one, and yet something compelled Mr. Hawthorne to keep reading. "You can help them," said the king, "but you must do so far away from the kingdom, in a small cottage I have prepared for you." "You mean I'm to leave my home as well?" the wizard asked. "Yes, you must do this for the good of the people. If you really want to serve them, you must do as I say," said the king. But the wizard was wise, and knew that the king truly wanted the wizard's tower for himself. The king would steal his magics from him in an attempt to become an even greater wizard. Mr. Hawthorne turned the page, and things took a drastic turn. The airy text and childlike tone had been replaced with thick, scrawling letters that covered both pages. The lettering seemed stitched into the book and woven of thin black strands like spiderweb. And the message, for which somebody took such a great effort, was 3 simple words. "Follow the money." The message was cryptic, irrelevant to the previous page's text, and in every way conceivable, a complete non sequitur. The mystery of these words, had they even presented themselves to anybody else, would have been utterly insignificant. But not to Mr. Hawthorne. When he was 4 years old, he read his first book all the way through on his own. Even without a proper education, he had managed to get through Waddy Piper's The Little Engine That Could. There was a wave of enlightenment that engulfed him, burning away his old ignorance with a new understanding. He could make those runic symbols on the paper in front of him to form words. Those words formed sentences, and those sentences ideas that he could decode. It was then that his love of books truly began. Now, a similar epiphany overtook Mr. Hawthorne. The book was meant for him. The book was written for him in this exact moment. Whether or not it ever truly existed before his hands sought it on that dusty old shelf was a purely academic question, as physical form belied purpose. This was his book. It was made to solve his problem. The wizard consulted many magical tomes within his library before discovering a candor concoction, a potion which revealed the truth of any who drank it. "Now," said the wizard with an all-knowing grin, "we shall force that king to speak truthfully of his intentions." Mr. Hawthorne had discovered something rather interesting about the jackhammer. Apparently, he did have aspirations outside of being the city's bulldog. It all began when Mr. Hawthorne took the time to look into what trendy new night location was going to be taking the spot of the library. The new owner would be a nightclub. And, as luck had it, they had a website to announce their coming attractions, complete with a floor plan and a list of donators and investors. The jackhammer was listed as a prime benefactor. He called the man in to talk to him about his little discovery. However, in a bit of unusual, brazen smugness, he denied any conflict of interest. "Look, buddy, we're a democracy. I'm free to invest my money into whatever company I see fit. I think they're going to do great, and it's worth my time to support them. If there really was anything untoward going on, don't you think I'd do a better job of hiding it?" he asked with a sneer. "It doesn't show exactly how much you donated, but based on the prime spot and the values they give to their tiers, I would say it's far more than a man like you makes," Mr. Hawthorne said. "I certainly hope you aren't dipping into taxpayer money to support this." The sneer washed away, replaced with a look of mild disgust. "If you think something illegal is going on, take this over to them instead of making an ass out of yourself. And frankly, old man, you don't want to mess with me in a legal battle. My lawyers will have a field day with you." The jackhammer picked up his briefcase and left. He was right, of course. Mr. Hawthorne was old and had a clearly established bias. Even if he was 100% right, the justice system would not avail him. But perhaps there was another way. He opened his drawer and pulled out the small leather book. The king had indeed answered him truthfully. The potion had worked. But the king was unafraid, even of the powerful wizard. "I'm the king," he said, "and I will do whatever I please." "The people shall know of your misgivings," the wizard insisted. "But the people are my subjects. They dare not rebel against the king of the land, nor shall you. I shall see you thrown in the dungeons for the rest of your life." The wizard reached for his wand. He knew that there was only one way that he would be able to liberate the people from the tyranny of this mad king. Mr. Hawthorne turned the page. As he knew he would, he saw once more the spidery black lettering across the pages. "He must die." Mr. Hawthorne stared at the letters. He knew the words, he knew the sentence, he knew the idea they formed. But this was not something he was capable of. The man was a villain, certainly, but deserving of death? But the book had been right about his connections. It had known so much. How to connect to Mr. Hawthorne. Mr. Hawthorne had trusted this book to be some manner of divine gift, or perhaps something altogether different. Perhaps the defensive will of the books that had manifested into a single tome. So long as it gave him the words of reassurance that he was doing the right thing, he hadn't questioned it. Yet, there was surely nothing holy in this book now. It was sooner the work of the devil than any guardian angel. And yet, there was a greater cause here. The more Mr. Hawthorne pondered it, the more he began to doubt himself. What if there was something else that he wasn't seeing about the jackhammer? What if he really did deserve to die? He'd flipped forward a few pages. They were all blank. He flipped back to the previous pages that had been written before it. They were blank as well. Even the page he had read not 2 minutes ago. The only page, besides the one he was currently at in the story, was the page at the very beginning of the book. This book will not tell you a story you want to read. This book will tell you a story that you need to read. A story he needed to read. It was all so simple. He had misunderstood the passage, that was all. Though part of him now wished he hadn't, it was clear that he could not undo it. He was invested in the story and must see it through to the end. He still had a part to play. It was the middle of the night when the wizard's strike landed. His aim was sorrowfully true, and in it the people found their voice at last. They ransacked the king's palace, dragging him out of his bed in the middle of the night. "You have cost us the gift of healing," they chanted. "Now it is you who shall go wanting." They bound the king to a stake and lit a fire beneath him. Soon the world would be rid of his evil for good. The wizard's sacrifice would not be in vain. 2 weeks passed between the last encounter between the jackhammer and Mr. Hawthorne. The evidence of his questionable connections and suspicions as to his embezzlement had been leaked to the public. Of course, this was all thanks to Mr. Hawthorne. He had done the one thing that people would not be able to forget, and at the same time assured the protection of his library. The mayor stood outside the library addressing the press. His most recent words were about the jackhammer. "We have removed the man from his position, of course, and he will be facing a criminal investigation. But that's not why I'm here today. I know Mr. Hawthorne's greatest wish has always been to see this library flourish, and he's put in many years of his life and dedicated to it. I don't think it's fitting under the circumstances that it should die." There was a smattering of applause, and the sound of a few cameras clicking. "Therefore, I'm happy to announce the grand reopening of the Bill Hawthorne Memorial Library."